The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. The Galien Week of Innovation has been made possible thanks to our precious friends and partners who share the Galien Foundation's values. First off, the two exclusive platinum partners are We would now like to acknowledge our two gold partners. Furthermore, we proudly introduce our corporate leaders partners. The associate partners are the grantors are To conclude, we are extremely fortunate to work with outstanding media partners who have contributed to the Galien Foundation's renown.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michael Rosenblatt, and I will be chairing today's session. The objective of this session is to provide some additional content and background for our largest event, which is occurring on Thursday in New York, in conjunction with the Galien Forum and the Prix Galien Awards. And we are convening representatives of the companies that have been nominated as contestants and candidates for the award. Before I tell you more about the awards and today's session, I do want to point you to a little poll that we are taking, and you can fill this poll out at any time during the session, and at the end, we'll be able to tell you the results. So the poll asks you, what is the most promising new medical advance likely to occur within the next 5 to 10 years, in your opinion? And you're given multiple choice. Please choose one, either effective and accessible vaccines for major global killers like HIV, malaria, and TB, or solving the blood-brain barrier, leading to advances against neurological disorders, and, or introduction of comprehensive diagnostics and therapeutic vaccines as preventative tools against a wide variety of cancers, refinement of safe, clinically effective CAR T and other cell and gene therapies across tissue types and types of diseases, or widespread use of patient-friendly digital and biocenter platform technologies that control or prevent the progression of major chronic diseases. So please have a look at that and submit it when you have a chance. And now let me just tell you a little bit about where we stand. This webinar series, as I mentioned, across the week leading up to Thursday, it has nominees from 4 categories: Best Pharmaceutical, Best BioTech, which is the section we're in, Best MedTech, which are devices, and the Best Digital Solutions. We have a record number of nominees, so 84. So things are very strong in our sector. I think people know that, they're experiencing it. Those 84 nominees are derived from 85 companies covering 15 diverse therapeutic areas, ranging from cancer and cardiology to neurosciences and infectious diseases. I also want to point out that this is the 50th year of the Galien events. So it's our jubilee, and it's a very special time as we look back on all of the great contributions to human health that have come from the enterprises associated with the Galien. We've got 14 of these webinars leading up to Thursday, and there are 3 of them in the Best Biotech category. And this year, because of the way things played out with scheduling and nominees, I actually have the pleasure of having a one-on-one conversation with one of our nominees, and that is Bola Akinlade, and he's the Vice President of Clinical Sciences, Immunology, and Inflammation at Regeneron. And so we'll be able to go into some depth on the nomination that comes from Regeneron. And then at the end, if there are questions, we will be able to field those as well. But I will begin by asking Bola to tell us about the nomination from Regeneron and some topics I hope you'll describe as you tell us about it, is why your company chose to work in this area, and what you've invented. What kind of impact does it have? Is it measurable? And the audience loves stories. So if I'm assuming maybe it wasn't a storybook success linear all the way. If there were some challenges that you encountered along the way, those could be learning for all of us. And I know I've asked you to say a lot. If you don't cover those, I'll remind you. So no worries. So please, Bola, we're very interested. Tell us the product and the background the background of the product, please.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to Galien. Certainly is a pleasure and privilege to sit here as one of the panelists. And thanks for the nomination of the product that I'm going to talk about. Its brand name is Dupixent, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Dupixent. We are on television ads, but more importantly, we certainly are making a huge difference in the lives of patients who suffer from the conditions that Dupixent is approved for. Its generic name is dupilumab. And I'll go back to the 1990s when Regeneron scientists, led by our Chief Scientific Officer, George Yancopoulos, theorized that type 2 inflammation was a key driver in multiple atopic diseases, type 2 inflammatory diseases, such as atopic dermatitis, asthma, chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps. These 3 conditions are conditions that we currently are approved for. But in the Regeneron labs, the Dupixent, dupilumab, was developed. It's a fully human monoclonal antibody that inhibits the signaling of interleukin-4 and interleukin-13 proteins, which are key drivers of type 2 inflammation. And these play a major role in the pathogenesis of these conditions that I mentioned earlier on: atopic dermatitis, asthma, and chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps. These conditions affect millions of people, patients in the US and worldwide, globally. And I'll first of all talk about atopic dermatitis. It's commonly known as eczema, and many people would perhaps know friends or relatives who suffer from eczema. But in its most severe form, or moderate to severe form, it is characterized by intense itching, skin desquamation or deformation, lichenification of the skin, crusting, oozing infections that really can be debilitating. And not until I actually started to be involved with clinical research in atopic dermatitis did I realize how much morbidity it had. And in some few instances, patients actually, unfortunately would lose their lives because of very severe atopic dermatitis. This is something that many people would not realize. And it's just eczema, just a skin lesion. But in its most severe form, it can have a very debilitating effect on patients. And prior to the development and approval of Dupixent, the standard of care was topical corticosteroids and also other topical agents such as tacrolimus that were approved for atopic dermatitis. And patients had to, if they had lesions that extended all over their bodies, they had to lather their bodies with so much of these lotions or creams. And they had problems with sometimes systemic absorption of corticosteroids. In some instances, when it was really bad, patients will have to be treated with systemic corticosteroids with the antecedent or attendant with the attendant problems with systemic corticosteroids. Michael, you're an endocrinologist. You're very aware of, osteoporosis is a big one with long-term use of corticosteroids. But, patients are more prone to infections. They have cardiovascular problems long-term. So this was standard of care. And sometimes they will try unapproved agents such as cyclosporine, other types of immunosuppressants, methotrexate sometimes. And these didn't really work very well, but it just showed to you how desperate clinicians were in trying to find treatments that worked for these patients. The next disease that we're approved for is moderate to severe asthma. And asthma is very common, and it's characterized by intense, wheezing that can occur spontaneously, chest tightness, difficulty breathing, and in many instances, patients get admitted to the hospital or go to the emergency room and have to get emergent therapies for this condition. And the last condition I'm going to talk about is chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps, which is an upper airway disease in which we have growth of tissues known as nasal polyps associated with inflammation of the sinuses. And this causes a blockage of the upper airways and leads to difficult breathing, nasal congestion, and nasal discharge. And very importantly to patients, the loss of sense of smell, which interestingly is one of the most important impairments that these patients have. It impacts the sense of smell and also impacts the sense of taste. And prior to the approval of Dupixent, the standard of care was topical corticosteroids, intranasal steroids, and in some instances, oral steroids to try and shrink the polyps. And if this doesn't work, patients had to have polyp surgery, polypectomy, and also sinus surgery. And sometimes patients had recurrent symptoms and had to have recurrent surgeries. And it's definitely very, very impairing to patients. So to date, Dupixent has been approved in the US, EU, Japan, and over 60 countries worldwide for the treatment of these conditions that I mentioned: atopic dermatitis, asthma, as well as chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps. And over 300,000 patients have used Dupixent in the real world. So that's an overview of Dupixent and the conditions we're approved for. I'm more than happy to go to the next question you had, which was a measurable impact that we can cite on the clinical outcomes for patients who have used Dupixent.
Oh, and Bola, maybe before you do that, I was, for some of the conditions that you mentioned, I know well that there are animal models that are reasonably predictive, but I don't know that about atopic dermatitis. Was there a good animal model that you could use as a stepping stone prior to development?
So that's a great question. No, not that I know of. Not that I know of.
So you just went by mechanism and said, we have safety?
Well, yes, we went by mechanism. We realized that Dupixent, by blocking IL-4 and IL-13, which we knew were key drivers of type 2 inflammation and atopic conditions, right? We knew that perhaps in these atopic conditions or allergic conditions, that perhaps Dupixent may actually be effective. And I want to just remind you and the audience that there was a similar product that had been tried in asthma, okay, which had not worked. So this was actually before we went into the clinic. So, but we believed in the science. And, if you know Chief Scientific Officer George Yancopoulos, he's extremely passionate about the science. And we pushed along and said, no, this, the biology supports what we're trying to do. And, atopic dermatitis was our first allergic condition that we tried Dupixent in.
Okay, great. Well, tell us about impact and whether you're able to measure it in people.
Absolutely. So Dupixent has been studied in more than 10,000 patients across 60 clinical trials. So we've had a wealth of experience, clinical experience with Dupixent in various chronic conditions driven by type 2 inflammation or have an allergic basis for their pathology or pathogenesis. And to date, we've had about 300,000 patients that have used it in the real world setting, that's outside clinical trials, post-approval. Adult patients so we started off our atopic dermatitis program in adult patients. And we were extremely surprised and gratified by the improvement patients had. Patients that had had lifelong itching and lifelong skin involvement with the atopic dermatitis, as soon as 2 weeks, saw improvement in the itch and subsequently started to see clearing of their skin. This was something they had never seen before. Remember, I mentioned earlier on, they had unapproved therapies that had been used, such as cyclosporine, methotrexate, and those types of immunosuppressants. And the types of improvements that were seen in our first trials with atopic dermatitis was just profound. And the clinicians and investigators who were involved with the trials were amazed. And our first trial actually got published in the New England Journal of Medicine to show you how important the outcome of that study was. Asthma was followed on very closely with atopic dermatitis. And we started off with adults, but we subsequently went down to children. As you know, in drug development paradigm, we usually started with adults, establish safety and efficacy, and then we go down to children. Now we've studied Dupixent in children as young as 6 years of age. And we just got approval in the US for Dupixent for the treatment of asthma in children as young as 6. So it's approved from 6 onwards, just to show you how effective it is and how safe it is. Dupixent demonstrated up to an 81% reduction in severe asthma attacks in patients 12 years and older through at least 6 months. And after 6 months of therapy, 86% of adults and adolescents reduced or eliminated their oral steroid dose. So we had a study in patients who could not get off oral corticosteroids. As you know, in very severe asthma patients, oral corticosteroids are used and they work, but they have deleterious effects long term. And the goal is to try to get patients off steroids. So we did a study where we evaluated Dupixent versus placebo in patients who were dependent on oral corticosteroids. And we showed that we were able to get the majority of patients off their steroids, which is huge. And in the final study, the clinical trial that we have for an approved indication, which is the chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps, the impact of Dupixent in improving the sense of smell. Remember I said smell was one of the most debilitating symptoms that patients had. In as little as 2 weeks, we saw an improvement in patients being able to smell. And this was so gratifying to many, many patients who had suffered for many, many years without being able to smell or have taste. And we reduced nasal congestion by as much as 50%, and 83% of our patients had fewer need to get nasal surgery with Dupixent. So not only improved symptoms, but also decreased the need for surgery in patients who want Dupixent. 3 out of 4 patients saw a reduction in systemic steroid use, because sometimes, as I mentioned earlier on, systemic steroids are used to shrink the polyps, and there was less use of systemic steroids in patients treated with Dupixent compared to the placebo patients. Dupixent has demonstrated a very consistent benefit risk profile across all of the indications. The safety profile within our indications has allowed us to go to the younger age groups. And we recently read out a clinical trial in atopic dermatitis in children as young as 6 months of age. So atopic dermatitis starts in childhood, and we were able to enroll patients as young as 6 months and demonstrate that Dupixent was effective and had an acceptable safety profile in these children.
That's terrific. I think one of the things that this points out for me is that many of these diseases, although they are very severe and cause the patients big league problems, that the inflammatory process, if you can control it, things are reversible. There's no irreversible structural damage or other kinds of damage. So you can actually move most of the way, and maybe in some people all the way back to normal. So that's a really nice aspect of where this drug works. So, I'm interested to hear about the challenges that anticipated or not anticipated that you encountered. I mean, boy, you made it sound so easy. We did this disease and that disease. We took these 3 diseases and we succeeded in all of them. Was it that easy? It couldn't have been.
Great question, Michael. Great question. Before I answer that question, I also want to just, related to what I was telling you about the improvement from our clinical trials.
Yeah.
They've also been confirmed in real life use of Dupixent. We've gotten heartwarming stories about how patients' lives have been transformed by the use of Dupixent now that it's approved for these indications. So, the dramatic effects that we saw in our clinical trials is also being reflected in actual use of Dupixent. And going back to your question about the challenges, yes, it does appear it's been smooth sailing. Well, one good thing about smooth sailing in drug development is you got to have a good drug or great drug,
Right.
as you know. And Dupixent is a one in a lifetime kind of drug for drug developers such as myself. Now, having said that, it hasn't been smooth sailing all along. And we started off many, many years ago, and we didn't, like you asked the question about animal models, you know, we went by certainly, you know, a strong belief in the biology, strong belief in the science, strong belief in our invention that we had developed an antibody that will be effective in actually inhibiting the signaling of these two cytokines, which we knew were the key drivers of type 2 inflammation, but we still had to demonstrate this in the clinic. So trying to convince clinicians or investigators that this biologic, okay, should be used for atopic dermatitis patients, and also convince regulators who hitherto had looked at atopic dermatitis, oh, it's just an itch, it's just a rash, okay? So it certainly was not easy convincing the regulators that, you know, a biologic had to be used. People were worried about biologic. You said biologic, they thought about, oh my gosh, it's going to be an immunosuppressant, it's going to give us infections, we're going to trade efficacy with, you know, infection risk. But we had to do the trials. So it took a while initially to enroll our first trial. But when the investigators started to see, and the patients also saw the dramatic improvement in our atopic dermatitis trials, it overcame the initial hurdles and resistance and reticence of patients enrolling in our trial. And I must say that, you know, when I joined at the start of the large phase 3 trials, we over-enrolled. In fact, the phase 2 trials, we over-enrolled because there was such a huge clamor to get into our trials because there were so many patients who had so much need to have a chance, even though they were going to be assigned to placebo or drug, right? But they said, oh, we'll take our chance. Maybe we'll be on that drug that's made my friend, my parent, skin clear. Mm-hmm. So yes, we had hurdles in the beginning, but you know, once it became widely known how well the drug worked, it was a lot easier enrolling our patients, and also a lot easier working with regulators. In fact, we got breakthrough designation from the FDA, and you know, they realized that, wow, you know, this drug is a game changer for the treatment of atopic dermatitis, and everybody began to realize how serious, you know, atopic dermatitis was, and how serious type 2 inflammatory conditions were, and how serious allergic conditions were.
But
and I must also talk about the challenges of developing an antibody from our research folks. Okay, they had to go through various iterations of an antibody, you know, to make it, you know, suitable for use in our clinical trials. So that there were challenges there, but we have the Velocigene technology that was invented by George Yancopoulos and his colleagues, and that's been the foundation for the development of groundbreaking antibodies that we've used at Regeneron, including Dupixent.
Well, you've given us a terrific view into the drug, and so I have just one more question for you. With this success, and you've really pointed the way to what you can do with an antibody in this kind of disease. What do you think is next? Does this set the stage for something different if we come back here sometime in the next 50 years of the Galien? Is there something where we'll be able to connect the dots all the way to Dupixent?
Yes, great question, Michael. And I remember you mentioning about type 2 inflammation and some conditions that cause structural changes, and if you can give them treatment, you know, it may be able to reverse the structural changes. So one condition comes in mind very clearly, eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a type 2 inflammatory condition also, which causes painful swallowing, dysphagia, vomiting, blockage of the esophagus, okay, because of the fibrosis and stricture from chronic inflammation, right? Dupixent has now shown efficacy in two separate trials, in fact, 3 trials, I would say, in being able to reverse some of this blockage that you find in the esophagus. And patients do not need to have dilatation, which they had to, put a physical device to try and enlarge the esophagus. So going to your question, the many more conditions that we are in clinic for. We just read out trial results in eosinophilic esophagitis, prurigo nodularis, which is a skin condition, chronic spontaneous urticaria, another skin condition. These are all conditions that who had known that there was a huge basis for type 2 inflammation with this condition. So 50 years from now, I think we would look back and say Dupixent opened the era of understanding the biology of type 2 inflammation and many more conditions that are being treated 50 years from now medically rather than other ways by the targeted treatments that we've discovered with Dupixent may be approved, but on the basis of some of the work that we're doing now.
What a great way to end. And, I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk about this one-on-one, and it really gave us a lot of insight into what you and the team have accomplished over at Regeneron. Before we show the results of the poll, I just want to remind everyone that, as I said, we're leading up to Thursday. This session that you and I have had, Bola, will be available to view on a webcast. And then Thursday, we're going to have a whole day of science and policy and medicine discussion at the Galien Forum. And then we will close in the evening with the awards, including the 2021 Roy Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Awards, which this year is going to go to the companies that develop the vaccines and the antivirals. So very exciting. It's the first time we've had this number of winners, first time we've had anything like this, and the CEOs of those companies will be there with us. So thank you, Bola. And now I'm going to sign us off as we see the results of the poll. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
So the poll, please. Terrific. Very interesting. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Take care.